I'm here with Jesse Kreitzer, who has done this short documentary labeled The Murder Ballad of James Jones, and he's here to tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Well, it's a short documentary about a Chicago bluesman named James Jones. He was a protege of Howlin' Wolf, Chicago blues great, who was also labeled, James Jones is a frontman for a Chicago blues band who goes by the alias of Tail Dragger. He was given that name by Howlin' Wolf because he never showed up for gigs on time, hence dragging his tail. And it's the story of a murder that James Jones committed in the early 90s. There was a rising feud with another bluesman named Boston Blackie. And James shared this story with me when he was actually wearing a hot microphone. He had been cast in a fictional film I'd produced about Alan Lomax, and that night we had gone to his hotel room. We brought a bottle of whiskey and went over the lines to make sure that we had clean audio, at the very least, of our fictional film about Alan Lomax. And later on that evening, you know,
like it just transpired from there.
It did, yeah. The lavalier mic was on James, and he shared this very compelling story, and also, you know, I titled it A Murder Ballad because the story actually establishes a level of empathy with James Jones. I mean, I don't look at him as certainly a malicious killer, and in fact, he turned himself in after committing the act. But I think he paints a pretty compelling portrait for why somebody is compelled to kill or put into a scenario where there's really no other alternative. So.
Okay, so it was more of a situational type of deal.
Yeah.
What would you like to see happen with this film?
To be quite honest, it's one of these films where it just happened. It was sort of serendipitous, and all it took for me was to recognize that this is really just a compelling story. And so, if anything, I don't have grand hopes for it, to be quite honest. I mean, it's a compelling murder story. It's sort of shrouded in the mythology of the blues. I mean, there's a deep-rooted history of myth and folklore associated with blues culture. And so, if anything, I think it's a very small little anecdote built out of that. But, at the same time, there's, other documentaries that I think are much more, say, culturally significant. But I think it's a compelling story, and people seem to enjoy it. But so, it's being screened. Eventually it'll be made online, but I don't, masquerade around like it's, the most culturally significant film. It was just one of these things that happened. And if anything, so I have conflicted feelings in that regard too, because there are projects you work really hard for, and then there are other projects where there's a spark and it just comes to you, almost falls into the lap. And so it's one of those, and it's a compelling murder story, which I guess everyone likes.
Throughout the film as well. I mean, is it just
you could certainly investigate.
Is there a huge emphasis on the blues movement too?
No, it's focused very quickly on telling this story. It's a ballad, which means it's from the perspective of James Jones telling.
So there's no soundtrack that goes along with this.
No, it's the voice, the human voice, and it serves as sort of a record, as a document, and it centers around a Presto field recorder. This is a 1930s acetate field recorder that Alan Lomax used out in the field. They were typically powered by car batteries because there was no electricity when these folklorists would tour the world to record folk and blues musicians. And so it's sort of just centered around document, and this is James Jones's.
Going back in time, what year was this?
Well, this was 1993, so it takes some, sort of creative liberties in terms of how it sort of retells this story. So it's built around this anecdote and James Jones telling the story, and 1930s Presto field recorder.
Looking forward to seeing it. Can you tell us, please, when the next viewing of it?
It'll screen tonight at the Sarasota Film Festival at 6 p.m. and I believe it screens tomorrow at 2:30. I think 2:30. And eventually it'll be made online, lanternafilm.com.
Okay, well, great. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks.
Looking forward to it.
Cheers.